Okay. ChatGPT, please write a 1-minute introduction to a podcast episode about the use of artificial intelligence in social protection, in the style of the Social Protection Podcast.
Welcome to the Social Protection Podcast, where we explore innovative ideas, policies, and practices shaping the world of social protection. I'm Jo Sharp, your host, and today we're diving into a topic that's transforming how we deliver support to those who need it most: the use of artificial intelligence in social protection systems. From automating benefit applications to predicting vulnerabilities and improving program targeting, AI is offering groundbreaking possibilities to enhance efficiency and expand coverage. But with these advancements come important questions about ethics, equity, and data privacy. How do we ensure that AI works for people, not against them?
Okay, not bad. Pretty plausible, if a bit generic. The era of AI is upon us, and it felt appropriate to give it a go, as today we take a close look at AI and social protection. But let's turn now to the human expert. And with me today, we have Thomas Burns, who is an independent humanitarian and social protection consultant and founder and director of Market Impact. Tom, welcome to the Social Protection Podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the call today.
Tom, we're seeing AI, artificial intelligence, disrupting all kinds of systems and all kinds of industries. So can I start by asking you, how is this disruption showing up in social protection?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. AI is now everywhere, and social protection is no exception. But let's start with some basics, because we talk about AI. What do we actually mean here? So first of all, AI refers to computer systems that can mimic human intelligence, often by recognizing patterns, making predictions, and ideally improving over time. But to note, we've all been using AI for a very long time. A spell checker was a form of artificial intelligence. So it is a spectrum we have been seeing progressively building up. Machine learning, which is one part of AI use, is essentially about giving computers lots of data so they can learn to identify trends or categorize information without being explicitly programmed to do so. Think of it as a tool that can sift through a huge amount of data and spot what might help before anyone else notices. Now, it is important to note, though, reason why we talk about AI a lot is because of the key breakthroughs that have taken place in the last 2 years of generative AI, which is the ability of AI to engage in a conversational back and forth, and also its ability to autonomously undertake tasks and be reliable in production of those results. So having said all of that, we're seeing AI influence social protection activities of governments in 3 key ways. The first one is in streamlining operations. Behind the scenes, AI can automate time-consuming tasks, help staff make decisions more quickly, and ensure that resources flow to where they're most needed. This can free up professionals to focus on their most complex or sensitive work. It can also improve access to service. On the client side, AI can power chatbots that answer questions in multiple languages at any time of the day, guide people through eligibility criteria, or simplify applications. This makes it easier for individuals to understand and claim the support that they're entitled to. And most importantly, but also potentially controversially, it can be used to enable proactive support for vulnerable groups. AI can help us anticipate needs before they become emergencies. So those are the 3 main areas, but I do want to flag as well, however, as promising as AI is, we need to be extremely careful. For the examples, which I will get into later, about where AI has been used well, there have been serious missteps.
So, Tom, can you give us some examples of countries or institutions that are incorporating AI into aspects of their social protection programs or using those tools in those kinds of programs?
Yes, I absolutely can. And first of all, I would say, to be honest, nearly every country that I've engaged with or worked with or researched is at some point looking at how they can use AI or AI tools to optimize their workflow. because again, we don't have enough people to do these tasks. But for now, I'm going to focus on just two, and they are from the West, mainly because there is more literature available that has been published. So the first one I wanted to talk about is from Estonia, which is already a very digitally enabled country. And they introduced an AI tool called OTT into their unemployment services to refine how they assess needs and determine what kind of assistance each person should receive. This system works by analyzing more than 60 risk factors, including their work history, their local labor market conditions, to help caseworkers tailor their support more precisely. So what it is in effect doing is the system has access to all these data sets from their social registry, from their civil registries, from the different registries, are scrolling them and are building up from that a profile and then giving that as a recommendation to the caseworker. The case manager previously would manually go and look, in theory, at all of these different databases and would manually have interviews. So that means that these subtle gains in targeting and timing translate into significant efficiency improvements. A key thing for the Estonians is that they calculated and identified that if they can cut unemployment by even a single day per person, it reduces 4% their total annual expenditure on these services. Another compelling example comes from Kent in the UK, where they've been using an AI-driven platform called OneView to prevent homelessness. This system aggregates data from housing, social services, and health sectors to identify households that might soon be at risk of homelessness. So the AI is just reading all of these records on a person, and it's trying to make a determination of, is this person trending at risk? And once it gets to a certain threshold for a person, we'll then flag them in the system of, this person probably needs attention. So rather than waiting for a house to become homeless and then receive assistance, they are in fact trying to take a proactive approach. And so by doing that, the social workers are able to intervene earlier. And this was very much done explicitly with a cost-saving benefit. Kent County Council saw homelessness rates drop by 40% and saved over £225,000 just in the first year. Now, again, it is crucial to note that in both these examples, the AI isn't deciding who gets help. It's guiding social workers towards the people who need it most, while still leaving final decisions in human hands and having a very transparent process. So both of these examples show AI's potential to strengthen various stages of delivery chain. AI can support that human expertise rather than replacing it.
We ran an episode a couple of months ago on social registries. And I think the example that Rodrigo Assumpção, who is one of the architects of the Brazilian social registry, was talking about detecting a single address where a lot of people were collecting the social pension. And this was initially flagged in the system as potential fraud, right? But in fact, when they went to that address, they realized that it was a sort of illegal or unregulated care home for the elderly. And what it was highlighting a different problem, which was about the conditions that those people were living in. So I think to your point, this is about empowering the social workers and the people who are actually at the front line to be able to do those jobs and have that kind of intelligence.
A very important point, which is the tool, though, could be fully switched to making all these decisions rather than it being human in the loop. And that is a crucial concern because it is a choice. The tool can provide a recommendation for the human, but then the human could just click, click, click and approve everything in one go.
Yeah, I think to your point about the temptation to take the human out of the loop and go with the generated product. Again, as we're seeing in fields from, academia, design and the arts, coding, it's really high, that temptation, and as you say, a significant risk. I will also say that there is a growing body of work that's looking at the use of machine learning in targeting and in particular proxy means testing. Proxy means testing usually involves administering a survey to collect lots of variables to evaluate socioeconomic status for individual households and determine eligibility for poverty-targeted programs. I was looking at a paper from Indonesia, for example, modelling a machine learning approach that allowed enumerators to essentially ask fewer questions to arrive at roughly the same result. And arguably, this is a real efficiency, and it could mean that more people are actually surveyed, which might actually go on to help with inclusion, seeing as you have to be surveyed in order to participate in the program. And if you're going to use these kinds of statistical methods, it seems like an obvious use case for AI and machine learning. But then, of course, on the other hand, there are real risks that this kind of truncated data collection, or by cutting off that collection prematurely, could lead to misclassification of households if their profile is a little bit unexpected or outside the algorithm. And that's without considering that PMTs are contested and already have a fair amount of inclusion and exclusion error built in. So, PMTs are already a classic black box, hard for people to understand, and it does feel like this is an area that is ripe for an over-reliance on the technology if there isn't also transparency and opportunities to contest assessment and so on. But turning now, Tom, you've been looking a lot at AI in the humanitarian sector, and particularly how it can be used in multi-purpose cash assistance and humanitarian responses. Why do you think we need AI in those settings, and what are the applications that we're starting to see?
So basically, the main driver for AI adoption in humanitarian aid right now is ultimately the unprecedented funding crisis that the humanitarian industry is facing. Funding is declining sharply. From 2023, around 36 billion was reported to OCHA, to estimated only 25 billion this year, even as global needs continue to grow. And that financial squeeze means humanitarian actors need to do much more with fewer resources. So as a result of that, we're seeing AI applications emerge in two areas. The first, and overwhelming most prevalent, is basically using existing AI tools as another tool in our arsenal, almost treating ChatGPT as if it was Excel. A great example of this was from the Turkish earthquake response with the IFRC supporting the Turkish Red Crescent. In that case, there was a small federation information management team. On day one, the earthquake has hit. They need to determine, are the markets still suitable? Is cash still feasible as a response modality? Where are all of the beneficiaries that they have been supporting? How do those beneficiaries overlap with the earthquake maps? And how can we predict that? And so they immediately went into it and they said, we need to use ChatGPT to help us, but we're absolutely not going to show any program data to this tool. And they did that purely from, we don't have the time to get ethical clearance and to decide if it's risky or not risky. But what they did do is instead use ChatGPT to write code for them, to scrape websites, to take information from the National Statistics Office, to build new frames so that they could overlay their existing beneficiary models with the data that had just come from the Turkish Earthquake Authority, and therefore, within hours, create real-time maps that allowed the Turkish Red Crescent to make decisions to respond. These teams would have built those tools previously, but it would have taken them weeks to do so. The other example that I could flag is recently I was supporting the Cash Working Group on northwest Syria when the conflict between Israel and Lebanon escalated. There was a large-scale displacement of refugees, in this case, from Lebanon into Syria. And I was on a Skype call with the coordinators in northwest Syria, and a Telegram video got sent through to them of a huge amount of people walking into the distance. And it was said that queue is 1 kilometer into the distance. And they had to make a decision very quickly. How many people were in this footage? But then one of the coordinators had popped in. He said, I just took some screenshots from this video. I put it into ChatGPT and I asked it to estimate it for me. And it said there is around 2,000 people in that queue. It actually turns out after the fact there was about 2,200 people who came to the transit center on that day. But that was enough information in that moment for those teams to say, okay, we need to call the area-based coordinators, we need to mobilize the different actors who are working there to move forward. We are also seeing the development of more specialized tools. But I will say, just as a final point there, it's crucial to emphasize that in all these cases, AI isn't being used to determine who receives aid. It's instead about speeding up information processing, helping human decision makers understand the context faster. The key use case that we're seeing across the board is AI helping humanitarian workers reclaim time from low-value administrative tasks so that they can focus on critical, high-impact work of saving lives.
What you're talking about here, of course, is helping humanitarians gather data about the scale and some dimensions of humanitarian problem, and therefore to mount a response. And of course, there are other examples of using satellite imagery to understand the scale of weather shocks, or there was an interesting case of tracking Facebook users with Ukrainian language settings to map displacement. Although, it's one of those things, I'm sure there are other ways to do that too. But it doesn't get down to that really granular kind of individual case-by-case needs assessment for people that I was describing earlier, which is what you're saying that really, really requires that human-in-the-loop aspect as well.
Yes, a lot of use of AI is in anticipatory action and adaptive social protection. We're seeing a lot of work there because it's relatively not easy, but if it's in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, we can identify trigger points. If the rains reach this much, this will likely cause X and this will cause Y. And then we can use it to overlay this information, topographic and disaster management. And then we could link that to a social registry information. If they have geodata on, there could be people here for targeting. And we can use AI to analyze satellite imagery in real time to identify in places where the national system may not have that water data, or to pull those things together. But it can't, beyond that categorical or area-based targeting, go down to, you still are going to need a team, if it is more specific vulnerability than that, to identify those people, unless you have a very robust social or national socioeconomic registry that is comprehensive, up to date, and that is very unlikely. And in the humanitarian analogy, there is never going to be that social registry. But that initial decision-making can also have large repercussions in humanitarian assistance on, okay, if we say that cash isn't going to be the response, we need to start that logistics to get food in. Or we need to say which region are we going to dedicate resources. But those more advanced use cases are something we will see more at the moment in the adaptive social protection or shock responsive social protection sort of sphere rather than humanitarian, purely because the capacities and budgets of government actors to build and use these systems is far higher than humanitarian systems. Because they are so budget strapped, the ability for them to build bespoke standalone solutions is less there.
Another very celebrated case in this vein in recent years has come out of Togo, when the government rolled out an emergency cash transfer called Novisi for vulnerable citizens during the COVID-19 pandemic. Togo didn't have a social registry or a database of potential recipients, so this program used machine learning algorithms alongside satellite imagery to identify the poorest neighbourhoods, and then mobile phone metadata to identify the most economically disadvantaged people to receive benefits. This is hugely innovative. It allowed the program to reach nearly 57,000 people who presumably would not have been reached at all without it. It was stood up really quickly, in contrast to those traditional approaches that rely on laborious survey collection, data collection. But, at the same time, exclusion error was acknowledged as a significant concern in that program. You have to have a mobile phone and know how to use it to be counted. So that obviously leaves very poor and vulnerable people out. There were also concerns about the collection and analysis of personal data. So a really important and innovative example, but I think also an example of how all countries from low to high income are coming to this technology at pretty much the same time and using it to leapfrog other systems, and a lot of learning to be done there. And so all of this is very exciting, but as we've just been saying, it does bring with it plenty of ethical questions and risks. Thomas, how does bias come into AI systems, and what are some of the ways that that can be addressed?
So you're absolutely right. As anyone who's worked on any development or humanitarian will know, poor data in gives you poor data out. So if the underlying data has flaws in it, the AI is potentially going to pick up on that. But additionally, we have now the added element that the AI mind itself, the AI model that is being used, is trained on huge data sets, but they're also not the same personality. And it sounds a very weird thing to say, but if you ask the same question to Google Gemini or Amazon's models or from OpenAI's ChatGPT, it will have a slightly different spin on it. The neural nets weren't created with the same information. They weren't designed with the same guardrails. So first of all, the data that these models are trained on can have assumptions built into them that can reflect societal basis. But again, we're not powerless against those risks of data bias. The first thing is keeping human in the decision loop. The human in the middle approach is essential. It's to assure that AI aids rather than replaces human judgment. In Estonia's unemployment system, the AI helps flag who may need extra support, but trained caseworkers still make the final decisions. Again, the same thing in Kent. It identifies people who may need additional intervention. Where we've seen in Australia's model or in Netherlands is where actually it was restricting access or penalizing human beings. People have a right to know how these systems shape their access to societal support. That social contract between us and the state is crucial, because if we don't understand how the algorithm operates, if it's just a magical box that says we looked at all of this data and we found that this person is a crook, but hold a second, how can you actually step that back? Also, AI requires ongoing oversight. Regular reviews of who's been included or excluded can help catch unintended consequences early. And this is also an important thing. In the end, our goal isn't just to make our services more efficient, it's to make them more equitable as well. With the right safeguards, AI can help us and identify and address biases in current systems and in its own self, but only if we remain vigilant and prioritize human dignity and fairness at every step.
You've made this point a few times, but it is really making me reflect on the risk of efficiency itself. If the human in the loop is the most expensive part of the system, and a lot of the drivers of this adoption is that efficiency and being able to do more with less. And you're running into these systems, as you say, that are cash strapped. I mean, I think social welfare systems across the world are also always looking for cost saving measures. So it will be that the fight to keep that human in that decision-making space, won't it? So, Tom, can you talk to us a bit about some of the risks around data privacy and security, perhaps especially in humanitarian settings, and how you think those could be managed?
Absolutely. So the first key point to note is that the AI itself doesn't introduce the new risks. The risks are always there of how we collect data, how we get consent for use of data, and how we store data. So the first thing is, for humanitarian actors, we collect a lot of highly sensitive information from vulnerable information facing crisis situations. And that's generally speaking because humanitarian actors are working in places where they don't have reliable functional or foundational ID systems. And so often they are having to collect much more personally identifiable information on a person, or even biometric information. This is a challenge we faced for many years, but now it's becoming very acute. How can we realistically ask for informed consent when, if you don't give consent, you will be in a life-saving situation? They're never going to say no, but is that actually realistic, informed? Is it correct for us to make those decisions? So that's an ethical challenge there. We also have what we call the nuclear waste paradox in humanitarian data. The information is incredibly powerful for enabling efficient aid delivery, but it's extremely dangerous if leaked or misused, especially in conflict zones. And we're talking here about basically beneficiary registries that are being created on the fly via Excel spreadsheets. And it's a miracle in many ways that humanitarian agencies are able to provide the assistance in these places. But it means that many humanitarian operations and organizations lack robust data infrastructure and technical expertise in how to adequately protect this sensitive data that they're collecting. And then that leads us to the issue of what we call shadow AI or shadow IT, which is the organization may say, well, we're not paying for AI tools, and blanket, we don't use AI tools. But if you have a overworked field officer on a Friday night and they've been told there's a proposal or a report or this has to be worked over the weekend, and you have a team who are generally working 15-hour days anyway, the temptation just to put that information into ChatGPT and do that analysis to write that email is huge. Then there needs capacity building. There needs guidance on where they can and where they can't and what tools they can use and not. If we ban outright AI tools, they will still be used by the people at the field level. We need to provide approved, secure alternatives that meet the field's needs.
Tom, what do you think should be at the forefront of our minds as AI becomes more prominent in humanitarian and social protection work?
First of all, my key takeaway from engaging with it so far is that I would say we need to recognize that this isn't like blockchain or other buzzwords that we've heard, where, okay, there's a lot of talk, but does that really impact us? No, AI and the new developments are going to impact us. It's not a case of do we choose to invest in using these tools? These tools are there. They are growing exponentially better each year. So we need to be thinking about these elements there. AI should enhance, but not replace human judgment. AI may help process situation reports and take a 10-page report and give a 1-page summary, but someone's still got to read that 1-page summary and still got to make decisions off it. We also need to have responsible innovation. We need to be strategic about where we employ AI. In social protection, and especially when we use AI in a new use case, we don't necessarily know all the lessons learned. The other critical thing is about building sustainable and inclusive systems. One of the critical things for humanitarian actors, less so for government, but is not no point, is the cost of compute. Previously, if we were developing a social registry or an integrated beneficiary registry or any other system, you would go, okay, well, we're going to have this $20,000 to scope out design of a system and buy some servers or whatever. But now if we're using an AI model, every single time you talk to that model, there's a cost. If you're running it on your own data, you will probably be running it in the cloud, and there'll be a cost associated with that. So as I said, that's why in many cases, humanitarians are focusing on existing tools that they can pay subscription services to rather than developing new tools. But it's working out how we can build these systems that are sustainable and they are inclusive and that they're accessible. And so that means developing tools that work in low resource settings, can be maintained by local teams and understood by national teams. And we also need to ensure that AI doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities. As you mentioned, the people included in the e-Dopomoga system in Ukraine, which was a social registry for humanitarian response, they had to have smartphones to register because they weren't able to register in person, which excluded a large subset of the most vulnerable population who were elderly and didn't have phones and weren't able to be registered into the system. So again, we need to make sure that these systems, just because we can build it and replace the existing traditional models, doesn't mean we should do it if we're not certain that we would have critical exclusion errors. When implemented thoughtfully, AI, from what we can see, definitely can help us reach more people, respond faster to crises, and deliver assistance more effectively. But this only works if we maintain clear, ethical boundaries and keep human dignity at the center. It's about AI empowering humans to better serve those in need.
Tom Burns, thank you so much for joining me on the Social Protection Podcast today.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Before we go, we like to end each episode with some quick wins. We ask a guest to bring in some recommendations for research, news, or events that have sparked their interest and that we think you should know more about. Joining us for Quick Wins today is Ralph Radermacher, who is Head of Program for Social Protection at GIZ. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you, Joe, for having me.
Although we're putting this episode out in 2025, we are actually recording it in December 2024. So we're speaking to all of our listeners in the future. And that seems appropriate as we talk about artificial intelligence. This past month, a 3-day workshop called AI for Social Protection was co-hosted by GIZ, the Digital Convergence Initiative, and the Asian Development Bank. That's in partnership with the World Food Programme, the World Bank, and the International Social Security Association, and co-funded by the European Commission, the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the ADB. To start off, I'm interested in one of the sessions that asked participants to formulate future goals that could describe the potential outcomes for artificial intelligence in social protection for specific countries. Are you able to share some of those goals with us and just be interested to understand what that reveals about the potential for AI in this space?
Sure, Joe. It was really interesting to see how countries share common challenges and objectives when it comes to using AI in social protection, despite the different contexts, obviously. One country talked about how they want to use the right data to improve targeting, whether in normal times or during shocks. And this is about making sure that support reaches the right people, especially when unexpected challenges arise. In a quite similar vein, one country formulated what I thought was a really forward thinking goal. They want to predict vulnerabilities based on life events and prevent them from leading to harm. So, for example, identifying risks like job loss or health issues early and stepping in before things get worse. Another country focused on making the largest social assistance program more efficient and effective. And here the idea is to improve how cases are managed such that benefits can reach people more quickly and smoothly. So these goals show how countries are starting to see AI as a tool to make social protection systems more proactive and fair.
This was an interesting event for bringing together social protection experts and policymakers, together with technology specialists, providers of AI technology, bringing them into small groups to workshop some of these particular approaches and solutions and applications of AI. What were your three kind of key takeaways from those collaborations?
So a key takeaway was the importance of clearly defining problems before jumping to solutions. It's easy to adopt a solution-oriented mindset, but as the saying goes, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah, and this is particularly relevant for AI in social protection. So instead of trying to fit problems to existing solutions, we need to focus on understanding the real challenges first and then evaluate whether AI is the right tool to address them. Another insight is the foundational importance of data in any AI development for social protection. So a strong national data infrastructure is a critical precondition, as the president of Brazil's IT provider, DataPrev, Rodrigo Assumpção, highlighted. However, it's not only about having data, it's about ensuring that it's high quality, unbiased, and also used responsibly. Biased data can cause significant harm in social protection systems, potentially exacerbating inequalities instead of addressing them. So it's essential to align data use with existing legal and regulatory frameworks. And where the frameworks are still developing, countries can look to international guidelines and adapt them for their specific social protection contexts. And you asked for three. For me, the final takeaway I would like to share is the critical role of capacity building at multiple levels for successfully integrating AI into social protection. So at the individual level, this means fostering expertise across both the technical and the sectoral domains to bridge the gap between technology and social protection expertise. And at the institutional level, organizations need to define clear objectives for AI initiatives and rigorously evaluate whether these goals are being met. And finally, at the political level, strong leadership is essential to establish a clear vision and develop robust regulatory frameworks that can guide AI implementation.
We talked a lot in our main interview with our guest today about the various challenges and, of course, risks that come with the increased integration of AI into social protection, as is the case with AI in all sorts of fields. What risks most alarm you or really stand out to you? And what do you think we need to be thinking about right now as this technology is still in its relative infancy so that we can address them for the future?
Super critical question, yeah. It's very important to realize that AI is a high-risk technology when it comes to social protection. We have witnessed countries with substantial technical capacities getting it wrong over the last years. So any application of AI should thus be considered carefully and not be trusted blindly. We had a very engaging panel on risks and ethical considerations during the workshops. And of course, the more commonly discussed risks like data privacy and bias in data and algorithms are critical and need to be addressed from the very beginning of any AI implementation, even during pilot stage. However, one of the less obvious risks that stood out during our discussions is a need to remember that in social protection, we are always dealing with people. And data is essential for AI, but we must avoid collecting data just for the sake of it. And caseworkers play a vital role in directly supporting beneficiaries, and we need to ensure they don't become reduced to mere data collectors at the expense of their critical human-centric work. As the opportunities, but also the risks of using AI in social protection are high, we are currently in the process of mobilizing a number of partners, and many are social security agencies themselves from various countries, to set up an international help desk for AI in social protection. And that help desk would be some kind of virtual sparring partners for countries considering to use AI. So we hope to kick it live around March 2025 and thus help countries to mitigate some of the risks inherent to this technology.
Yeah, that's such an interesting idea. As I think I mentioned in the first interview, it is really interesting to see that all countries are really coming to this technology at a similar point in time. So, as you say, a real opportunity for learning. And as always, we'll put links to resources from the conference into our show notes. Ralph Rademacher, thank you for joining me on the Social Protection Podcast today.
Thanks, Joe, for having me.
And thank you for listening to the Social Protection Podcast, brought to you by socialprotection.org. You can find all of our past episodes on the socialprotection.org website and on your favourite podcast platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review.